philosophical discussion. Sorry it is a bit late today. I think it's not actually late for you guys, it was late for It stands to reason. And I apologise, it stands to reason. I did actually expect myself to be here sooner, but better late than never, I suppose, and we're going to be discussing anti-natalism. Obviously, those of you who follow the channel will see that I've talked about this topic numerous times, and I've had some pretty interesting discussions with anti-natalists. My positions have, I think, remained the same. I'm not convinced by the anti-natalist position, although I am sympathetic to it in many ways. I think that it's a genuine ethical issue that needs to be investigated, whether we should or should not have children, but that it does not create a, let's say, a universal principle. There is no universal principle of whether we should or should not have children, and I think that that would deny both the anti-natalist and the natalist position. So, I'm going to call It Stands to Reason now. We're going to have this discussion, and then afterwards we're also going to get into Demon Mama's gender takes, which I saw yesterday. I saw yesterday on Destiny stream, and it just, honestly, it was something wild, and I can't wait to get into it. If breeding animals isn't vegan, how is breeding humans? Because I don't lock animals or humans in a cage. It's like, if there's nothing wrong necessarily with, like, if you have two dogs and they bred, like, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Like, I'm not like, oh no, puppies. Like, you know, it's more like, don't birth them for the consumption and exploitation of that humans want to kind of do with them. It's more like what we're doing to animals, not necessarily the existence of animals. I'm not a vegan because I'm an anti-natalist. So anyway, anti-natalists aren't cringe. I think anti-natalists have some pretty interesting points. I think that you're genuinely worth listening to them. Anyway, so we're going to get into it, and It Stands to Reason might stand with reason on this topic, but not you, PP. Well, I'm all the same, won't we? Anyway, let's get into this. Hello.
Hello.
How you doing, mate?
Good, how are you?
I'm pretty good. So, you want to discuss anti-natalism with us?
Sure.
Right. So, do you want to low down of where I'm at with anti-natalism, and then we can take it from there? Because I've had a few discussions with anti-natalists. Mostly good, one bad, I'd say. Or like, mostly good, and then like a few bad with the same guy.
Okay. Alright, yeah, sure, that sounds good. Can I call you Lewis?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
What should I call you?
You can call me Dave.
Dave? Right.
Yeah.
Right. Dave, what should I do? What do you want to start? You want us to start?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and tell me, you know, kind of give an idea where you're at, and then we can get into my thoughts on it.
Okay, so my understanding of anti-natalism is a philosophy which seeks to prevent the birth of any sentient being, usually, not just humans, for the active prevention of suffering. The philosophy seeks to argue that any birth that is that we do, you know, perform it, as in we partake and actively birth someone, we are culpable for the suffering that is brought into the world. Some argue for an asymmetry, Benatar's asymmetry on that, where we are culpable for the suffering, but not for the well-being. Some argue that even if we were culpable for the well-being, there is no such thing as well-being, and there is only really suffering in general. So even if we are culpable for the well-being, then all we are doing is saying that we are culpable for the diminishment of suffering anyway, which could have been prevented. And then there's more complex forms. I think it's like Cabrera's position, which is whether there is a positive evaluation of existence or a negative evaluation of existence itself. I can't remember Cabrera's position too well off the top of my head. I had a very long discussion with Seven of Swords, and I found that a very interesting position, but I think that it had to make claims about existence being good or bad in and of itself before we get into that. When it was trying to evaluate negative ethics before positive ethics. So that's what I know about antinatalism so far. As of yet, I'm not convinced that there's any universal principle of whether it is right or wrong to have children. I think that it's contextual. I think that it depends upon the circumstances that you are going to birth those children into, whether their subjectivity will be respected, whether you're doing it for the right reasons, and whether the environment and the context of society will allow for their flourishing. So, yeah, that's where I stand.
Okay. Cool. You mentioned if it's done for the right reasons. What kind of reasons would be right ones?
Okay, so I would say like the first thing is to show like the wrong reasons. So I would say that anything which is the inconsideration of the being born. So breeding them to be eaten, for example. Not treating them as a means to an end and not end in themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pause there for a second. So, what justifications or what reasons are given that fit that criteria?
That aren't using them as a means to an end.
Right. So you say a lot of reasons are because I want to, carry on my lineage, lineage, or to help the economy, to help my nation, to further the species. A lot of these are common responses, but I guess my question is, which one of these, in your mind, are for the benefit of the child themselves?
Well, I think that you could have, so for example, when you talk about, let's say, the well-being of humanity, if it was for the well-being of humanity, the child would be considered human and be considered within that. But that would mean that they would have to be treated, I think, as an end in that endeavor as well. Like, you couldn't make them a slave class. They would have to be of the same category as everyone else. So if you're considering the universal category of humanity from which they are then considered, I don't think that's necessarily an exploitative relationship, so long as they aren't actually being exploited. Like, you're not birthing them as slaves or something like that.
Okay. I understand that idea. I don't, so I diverge from a lot of antinatalists in some areas, but one thing I would say is I don't consider humanity, the label, to be really meaningful as far as ontology. I consider individuals important, not humanity as a whole.
You're like a nominalist or something.
Yeah.
You see. So, I'm a realist, so I'm an indifferentist.
Okay.
So I don't think that when we talk about humanity, I think humanity precisely is one and the same as the lived experiences of all humans. It is the actual subjectivity of humans, like anthropocentric subjectivity. I don't think that it's morally that important. Like, I think that when it comes down to ethics and the consideration of what is ethically important, that actually is grounded in sentience, in the subject-object relationship. And as
right,
so like, if you wanted to say like it's bad for everything but humans, and so you're doing it for humans, I'm like, well, you shouldn't just consider us.
Yeah, so like this idea that, if humans stopped reproducing, humanity would die out, to me is not a justification, because there's nothing innately valuable about the label of humanity or our particular species in the objective universe, right?
But it doesn't have to be. I would say that there was something innately valuable about subjectivity itself. I would 100% say that. I'm a moral realist. I'm like a moral objectivist in that respect, and I would say that subjectivity is inherently valuable. And as such, humans as being subjects are inherently valuable. But I would also respond as well, saying that just because it's not inherently valuable doesn't mean that it can't be. Just because it's not let's say, like, intrinsically morally valuable doesn't mean that it can't be extrinsically morally valuable. For example, more humans may produce a better overall experience of subjectivity in the world. Like, I'm going to posit this, and I would say I'm not a utilitarian when I give this example, but a utilitarian might, for example, say, well, if humans are living better lives, then having a lot of humans would necessarily create a better outcome, right? Now, I don't actually agree with that. I don't actually think more is better, right? And I think that's a mistake on their part. But you could say that the expression of subjectivity for humans requires maybe like a certain balance of how like birth to death ratio, right?
Right, but that kind of begs the question. And when you say that subjectivity is valuable to humans, that assumes there's humans to value it.
Oh no,
But if you're comparing
I'd
two
say
situations where you have no one exists, and you have some humans, right? The experience and the subjectivity of those humans is valuable in relationships within them.
so. I'm not saying that subjectivity is valuable to humans. I'm saying subjectivity is valuable in and of itself. So like if there was no humans and there was only pigs, they're valuable. They might know it, like they don't do ethics. They might understand like that they are like valuable in themselves, but they are valuable in themselves.
Okay, just so we're on the same page here, I can, when I say people or humans, I know that's a common vernacular, and I don't mean to be exclusive. I do mean sentient beings. I'm a vegan, and so I value all sentient.
Good lad. What a good lad.
Okay, so we're on the same page there. So it's more of shorthand or maybe a habit of speech.
Right. So yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
So like yeah.
I would consider. Go ahead.
Yeah. Like so, if there was no subject-object relationship in the world, there'd be no such things like good, bad, wrong. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, okay, that's fine. I guess I can kind of give you my perspective and see what you think of it.
I mean, I will say this: that if you do hold to that, that really, I mean, people that are like, do you agree with Julio Cabrera? Because I think he would really push back on that. Because he seems to, I think, from what I understand, he seems to think that ethics can be negative, like so that you can have an ethical consideration without subjective. I mean, I don't agree with his position necessarily. I don't know if he's a non-naturalist, so I'm not necessarily sure what like metaphysical grounding he's taken. But I know that he wants to say that there is a negative ethic, so that like you don't actually have to have existence for ethics to exist. But would you agree that ethics?
No, I don't agree with that. So my ethical perspective is probably unique amongst the people you've talked with. And it springs from I don't even want to call it like a moral realist position, because that kind of implies some kind of non-subjective reality. But so the idea is that morality is grounded in the reasons that sentient beings have to promote or inhibit desires. And so,
I don't think I'm that far off, to be honest. So you would say that.
Okay.
So if you say that again, so like, what was it like? Was it like
the reasons that sentient beings have to promote or inhibit desires?
So you say that ethics. So is it ethics or morality? What are you saying? Like morality, or like do you care about the distinction? Or are you just using it synonymously?
So I usually consider ethics as applied morality.
Okay.
So they're very related but distinct.
Okay, so you're saying applied. You take that as applied morals. Okay, so and then the reasons, and morality is the reasons that the reasons. Sorry, could you say that again? The reasons.
Sure. The reasons that beings have to promote or inhibit desires, and those reasons themselves are based on their own desires.
Okay. So it's okay, right? The thing. So yeah. So ultimately, so to have or promote, to have or the reasons that beings have to promote or inhibit desires. Okay. And those reasons themselves are founded upon desires.
Right. Yeah. So this would be considered a coherentist.
Okay.
View, not foundational.
All right. Are you going like? I feel like the ghost of like maybe it's like Heidegger or Kierkegaard, like looming over or something like. Like you know,
I don't know. To be honest, I don't. I know you talk about those guys a lot. I don't know a lot about really either one of them. So I apologize. I'm not that as well versed as you are.
No. It's not that. It seems continental. It's just not that. It's just like obviously you're saying that you don't want to call it realist because you want to make it subjective, and that implies to me that you don't think that there is like an objective subject, like in a Hegelian sense. So you kind of want to limit it to the individual themselves, and like maybe it's like kind of like I don't know, like I'm not too well versed on Schopenhauer and stuff, but on like or like Kierkegaard even, I'm somewhat well versed on them, but not amazing with Kierkegaard. But it seems like a subjective will, and that everything kind of like truth is subjectivity, and it boils down to like your own subjectivity and your own sort of actions in the world. And so is that where we're at? Is it like that, or is it?
So it depends on how, the way you're using the word subjective, because there's two common usages, right? There's subjective versus objective, meaning independent of one's attitudes toward the truth of a proposition. Ice cream is good. It's subjective, right? And then the other clear distinction is mind dependent.
Yeah.
Right. So this view is objective in the first sense, in that the conclusions or the truth aptness does not depend on the attitude of the one making the evaluation. But it is subjective in that it is mind dependent and requires subjects to have desires and to have reasons to promote.
Okay, so it's going to be epistemological objectivity. You're going to say that there is actually, nominally, only particulars, but there can be truth, or but there is like a truth about those particulars.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And we can say there's like generally broadly true propositions like murder is wrong. That's not like a Kantian imperative or anything, but it is generally true of the population.
So if I was to say murder is wrong, you would say that would be, let's say, that would reflect the reasons. It would be true. What you would say is it would be true that every agent, or that most agents, desire to inhibit the motives for murder or something.
Right. So murder is wrong because beings generally have many and strong reasons to inhibit desires that cause people to murder.
Beings have strong reasons to inhibit desires.
Yeah, and I would say I don't take a bipolar view of any statement. If to the degree that beings generally have reasons to promote or inhibit those desires. So you could have some statement like abortion is wrong, right? Abortion is a very controversial topic because there are reasons to promote or inhibit on both sides of the matter, and so the objective standing of that statement is that it's good to a degree, and that depends on the reasons that people generally have, and it's wrong to a degree. And that may be like, if you think of it like as a positive or a negative, it'll have some valence, a positive, and then be pulled in the other direction, and where that actual balance is, it would be the actual final evaluation.
Okay, so it seems to me that you want to say that like everyone kind of has their own reasons for action, right? And that comes down to their own desires. And that those desires, and where would you say that those desires come from? Are they being like caused by something else, or are they choosing?
They're caused by genetics and their environment.
Okay, so materials caused by right. Okay, so what you want to say, I think in some respects I kind of push back in talking about. So it seems like you're kind of a compatibilist in this respect, yeah.
So compatibilist as far as free will, you mean?
Yeah.
So this kind of relies on determinism being true, because the reasons have to be motivated by desires, right? And you can't act in a way that goes against your own desires.
So why should I endorse a universal principle if I can't act against my own desires, especially if I say that the material process which led me to be, as it includes a sex drive and a desire to reproduce and pass on my genes?
Sure. So to say something should be the case means that there are reasons for it to be the case, not necessarily reasons you have, but reasons that exist. And those are the same reasons I'm talking about when I say that people generally have reason for you to X. It means that there are. I'm sorry.
I said okay. I just said okay. I'm just listening. I'm sorry. I'm just.
Oh, okay. Right. So, I agree that maybe you, when you're thinking like personally, you shouldn't abstain from procreation, right? But generally speaking, people and the reasons I'm antinatalist are not specifically due to the desires to procreate. They are due to the consequences of those actions.
Yeah, but I mean, why do they matter? Like, look at it from my perspective. So I'm looking at it from, like, if all of this is hard determined, then the ability to modify let's say, the actions of the population based upon universal ethical principles implies that there is like some sort of agency, that an individual could, like, had the option to act otherwise, and that in fact this discourse isn't just, another, performative action which is controlled by, let's say, our own base drives and so on. So what kind of, so this is the issue. Like, well, there's a few issues, right, that kind of I've got a problem with so far.
Okay.
One, the universality of this seems to really, I mean, like, obviously, it seems that you want to say that everything is almost particularized to the desires of the individual agent, which, like, I have issues with that even working, but we'll not get onto the metaphysical issues just yet. I think we can just work on the sort of epistemological ones. So, it seems to me that we need to look at it like, right, so, all of this is founded upon, let's say, the causal nature of material. My desires to reproduce come from a long series of evolution, my engagement in society, it's the sublimation of my drives, all of that has been produced by a causal relationship that pre-existed my birth, and I'll be influenced in and out of various desires and expressions until I die, and that's it, right? That's kind of all I have. And then, yep. And then in that, you also want to say that, well, there is, when we talk about morality, we're saying that these desires that we have, and I think that kind of almost need to talk about a soft, like a soft determinist sense for this to make much sense, where you say like, well, look, yeah, we are all determined, but we've all been determined with these desires, and so we're all actually trying to express these desires. And that's what we're talking about in terms of morality. And in which case, I don't think that's compatibilism, I would say, basically. And I think I've kind of got to imply that. Like, I don't think that necessarily, I don't think it's free will, like, in the grand scheme of things.
Okay. Okay.
But, like, I think that's what you're kind of arguing for, at least in some respects. Sorry.
Let me just interject one thing. So, the reason this works is because humans are the kind of beings whose many of our desires are malleable, and they can be influenced by our environment, which includes other people. Mm-hmm. And the speech acts of praise and condemnation can deterministically have effect on our own desires.
Yeah, and this is the thing. So, like, what you're actually doing is, like, you're saying, like, I'm determined to try and influence your drives, and you're determined to try and influence my drives. It's not right or wrong, it's just matter in motion, right?
Right, so the terms right and wrong are attempts at a statement of truth, right? They're attempts to say what wrong means is that there's many people that exist, or many beings that exist, that have reasons to cause you to have different desires.
Well, I mean, I would say that when we talk about right or wrong, I think we're actually saying that you are incorrect about that behaviour being justifiable or not. And obviously that's what you're doing here is you happen to define ethics as a subset of physical, of physics, because you're taking a physicalist stance, right? Like, ethics is like a subset of, like, or at least epistemologically, posterior to but I'd say like material consequences. So you're like, well, ethics has arisen from a biological process, which is, let's say, promoted pro-social behaviors, which have allowed us to express our drives.
Yeah, I would say that's probably pretty close to accurate.
Right. Okay.
So I guess if there's a goal of this version would be what referred to as a harmony of desires, where it doesn't mean everyone has the same desires, but it means that all desires are mutually beneficial.
No, I would even say harmony. I think that looking at it like harmony is probably the wrong way, because like you could have a desire to conquer everyone, and there's nothing wrong with that desire, so long as you can convince other people through speech acts that to acclimate that desire. There's that's fine, or might makes right even. There is no actual, like, in terms of because there's no actual standard to judge these reasons. This is what I was getting onto, really. So there's no standard epistemologically to judge these reasons as right or wrong, as in good or bad in themselves, since it's all particularized, and you wanted to particularize it. The universal principles that you wanted to make in terms of allowing for this harmony being good, or or anti-natalism, or anything that it may be, whether it's murder is wrong, don't actually obtain. This is why I would say that this leads to what would be more akin to a Nietzschean position, right? So Nietzsche would just turn around and say, like, yeah, truth actually is only a representation of will. The only things that we're actually trying to do is essentially express our desires. In the expression of our desires, we come into conflict with one another, and truth now becomes a currency, and moral truth, especially in this, as a way to essentially forward our own drives. And then the more people who acclimate the truth that we profess, the more likely we are to obtain and express our subjectivity. So truth is a currency.
All right. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that as far as truth. I would say that we have praise and condemnation acts that we use to get others to have different motivations to act. So, if I don't want to be harmed, I have reason to cause others to not have desires that cause them to harm others, right? So that my chances of being harmed are lowered.
Only if you accept that risk-reward ratio, right? Because you could just approach morality from a totally different perspective. Like, rather than looking at like morality, like, so let's say you're like Callices in Gorgias, right? Where he's like, let your desires wax and wane at the highest and utmost degree. The only reason that we are engaging morality is to to power the stronger, to prevent ourselves from being hurt. But this is the thing. So if we accept that all it is desires, there are no actual positive or negative desires in themselves. People are just doing what they want, and they're doing it because they have been, maybe it's the way that they're being raised, the biology, whatever it is, like socially, like that psyche, that pathology, and so let's say you get like this really strong, charismatic, super intelligent, just absolutely godlike murderer, right? Who everyone thinks is a stand-up person because they're incredibly charismatic. Let's say they manage to get themselves into politics like a good psycho, and or like in some like Wall Street or something. They gain an incredible amount of power. They sacrifice children on the weekend and no one bats an eyelid because they don't even think about them, right? Why should that person engage in a universal principle which is going to delimit their power and not allow for the greater expression of their desires?
Well, what do you mean by should? Do you mean personally or morally?
Well, is moral not personal for you? Because it seems like it
No.
is. So, okay, then I totally misunderstood. How is moral universal?
Morality is the aggregate of all the reasons.
All right, so it's the aggregate of all the reasons, right? So, but wait a minute. So, what I don't understand is, let's say I have a reason that totally contradicts your reason. Like, I'm pro killing you and you're against killing me. I mean, like, you're against me killing you, right? Like, let's say like that. Like, so, like, serial killer, that guy wants to kill the kids on the weekend. They have reasons to live. He has reasons to kill them. Why should he accept their reasons to live over his reasons to kill them?
Okay, so first of all, the truth of what I'm talking about is not dependent on if someone believes they have a reason to or if they should. It's an objective statement of the way the world is in the world, I mean the brain states of the beings that live in it. So
okay, but that's fair enough. But then it's got to be action urge, right? So because it's morality, and we're talking about something which is regulating drives, like why
right.
they should. It has to be action urging. So it has to somehow relate to why. Like they have to have some sort of motivating force, which will like let's say what you could like, let's say you were to describe to them. Yet like look, everyone thinks you're an asshole objectively. Like this is wrong. And he's like, I don't care.
Okay.
So
well, Lewis, I think if you're asking me to come up with a motivating force that isn't based on someone's desires, then you're asking for me to do magic because that doesn't exist.
Well, well, I don't know. Like the Kantians, like if there's any Kantians in chat, they're probably losing their shit hearing that. Like I know Marty would be like, "What do you mean? You're motivated by reason alone?" Like anyway, but like
yeah, well,
I think you're right. I would actually endorse that. It is drive that moves us. I think.
So what I can say is,
I wouldn't particularize what drives, and I think that's the difference. I think like the way that you're looking at ethics is because you're looking at it in a physicalist, kind of subjective, ontologically subjective. Ontologically subjective, but epistemologically objective. Like there is a truth about you, but the moral truth is only about you, right? Do you know what I mean? Or if we aggregate them, then it's nominally true. So like it's like there are 12 chairs, but like that the existence of those 12 chairs is only a description of 12 individualized, particularized chairs. The truth of those chairs is actually that there are 1, and 12 until you get to 12.
Yeah.
You know, like the actual or the concept of chair, the universal concept that is shared by them in this sense, is actually just a stand-in. It doesn't actually have any meaning beyond the ostensibly pointing towards, some sort of particularized subject. But this is
well, ontologically, yeah, I agree. It doesn't have meaning, but if we're talking, about labels and how we're going to talk about things, you can say there's 12 chairs because we have 12 people we need to each have a seat for. I don't want to get too bogged down.
No, that's fine. And I think that's exactly what a nominalist would say. Like we're like, yeah, we have 12 chairs. Except when I talk about chair, I just mean a given chair. It's like when I talk about, so if you go like, when I'm talking about subjectivity and the aggregate reasons that those subjectivity have, you all up. You like the nominalist would turn around and go, well, no man, you can't really add like you can say like everyone has their reasons, that's true, but those reasons obtaining like there is no truth that is greater than those reasons. There's no reasons why those individuals should reason something else, like you can't go like you should reason that murder is wrong. You're just like, you do reason that murder is wrong, and somebody else reasons that murder is right. And I mean, I deny all of this. I'm not going to lie to you, like all of it. But I'm just going to point out the epistemological issues. Like, if we did go down this line of reasoning, then the universal principle of antinatalism wouldn't obtain. That's the issue with this is the issue with particularizing subjects. If you're talking about it becomes it becomes what I would say almost accidental or coincidental. I don't even think I would argue we couldn't have knowledge over it, and I'll fight anyone who says otherwise. But even if we could have knowledge over it, we couldn't have let's say a universal guiding principle motivating that individual to act that wasn't then also particularized to them. You'd have to go, well, your desires. Do you know what I mean? You'd have to be like your personal belief system, and this is what people get into online. They're like, for example, ask yourself or something would be like, well, wait a minute, no, we're just talking about you right now. We're talking about why you want to kill animals, and then he puts them through, the what is it, like name the trait, and he's trying to show a contradiction in the way they're thinking to try and show that their personal, individuated drives are in confliction, right? Now, you see, I don't agree with necessarily how this works.
I don't agree with his methodology either, so I think we're on the same page there.
I think you have to do something.
I did want to. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So this is the thing. I think you'd have to do something like that, and it would primarily be for the act of trying to persuade them against it. And this is why I think you would kind of have to agree in some respects with Callices in Gorgias, right? When he's like, the weakest, the morality is the expression of the weak trying to gain power over the stronger. If there was some super powerful maniac who liked killing people, you'd be like trying to convince them not to kill people for your benefit and for the benefit of your desires. But that's as far as you'd get, you know.
No, I don't have to convince them. I can just say that people generally have many and strong reasons to convince him, but it doesn't make it moral for him to want to do that. It just means that he has a desire he shouldn't have.
But it would be. Well, that's the thing. Shouldn't have. This is the thing. What do you mean by moral? Like what you're describing in morality is the aggregation of morals, right? It would be when you say moral, if you are relating it to a particular individual's reasoning, and that reasoning is always individuated.
Okay. There's confusion here.
All right.
I don't mean reasoning. I don't mean like someone's reasoned into this belief or this, because right, you have the ability to reason and form beliefs. But when I say a reason to do something, I mean that they have a motivation to do it or a desire, right? Desires are not reasoned into; they precede reason.
Yeah. So and then the morality is based off those desires, right?
The desires, but not the reasoning itself. Like so you can have a false belief.
Exactly, but that means the reasoning. So you're saying that. So the reasoning. So let's say someone comes to a correct belief about themselves. They actually do have the desires to kill children, right?
Sure.
Which is, I think we would agree, that makes them an absolute maniac, and they should definitely be stopped. So, but we'll get on to that later in a minute. Right. And let's say they've reasoned themselves into some sort of position that they, because they actually they know that if they kill children, they feel happy, or at least they.
Okay, so just stop there for a second.
Okay.
Let me ask you that. Based on that situation, does their attitude towards killing children change anything about the rest of the population's attitude towards their own children being killed?
No.
No. So the fact that they want to do that has no bearing on whether, under my system that I'm referring to, whether it's morally okay or not.
But this is the thing. What you're describing as morally okay is just, let's say, collectivized judgment. And it just seems like the collectivized judgment isn't necessarily have any more rational force.
Not judgment. The collective reasons, right, which are desires based, not judgment based. I just want to be clear that
this is what I'm kind of confused at, right? So let's say that they're in this case, let's say if the population, and I will just assume that this is the case, and if this is the case, it'll maybe help us understand your system a bit more. Does the population agree he wants to kill children? Like if he's like, I want to kill children, I will kill a child right now. Would the population agree that he wants to kill children?
Sure, I don't see why it's relevant, but go ahead.
Okay, right, because if they were saying that he was epistemologically incorrect, and that he's wrong that he wants to kill children, that's probably closer to my position. I'd be like, you are actually wrong. You're incorrect about your own judgment.
I grant that some people they really do want to do some very antisocial things. I would allow them the
I would agree as well. I think that they do want to do some antisocial things, but I'd say that they were, one, wrong for endorsing that as the content of their desires, and two, they were wrong that they thought that it was going to make them happy. They were wrong about the conclusions in the relationship to themselves. They were wrong about that self-knowledge.
Yeah, I would go even further and say, yeah, maybe it'll make them really happy, but that doesn't change the rest of the population's attitude towards that act.
See,
they still have reasons to inhibit it.
You see, this is the thing, because I'm an indifferentist. I would say your happiness and my happiness are actually one and the same thing. So when we're doing ethics, we're considering the same concept. So if I'm trying to find some sort of means-ends relationship and balance my life that doesn't consider your means-ends relationship, then I'm actually not performing rationally. I'm not considering the universality of the concepts that I'm actually using to deduce what is good and bad, right and wrong. Which is why, like, I'm an objective, like, sort of, an objective realist, like, in this respect. I'm like, well, there isn't actually a right and a wrong, ontologically and epistemologically, and we can find the truth of that matter, you know? Like, so, like, murder is wrong relates to these desire states and these experiences by individuals. You see, with you, in this case, morality is totally particularized, and this is the way I'm understanding. You correct me if I'm wrong, because if I do not want to strawman you at all. It seems to me that desire is completely particularized from our socio-political environments and our material, which has led us to construct certain dispositions towards attitudes, and these are just causal, right? We're not actually able to modify them beyond, just the way that we are modified by, matter in motion, right? And as we're going through life, they sometimes change, they sometimes get modified by interactions through other people. But that's just what happens. It's just a description. It's not necessarily a prescription. There's no sort of prescriptive attitude which tells me that you should be a murderer or you should not be a murderer, that kind of thing, right? Now, in that, when I'm trying to express my drives, that's just my biological organism trying to express my desires in the world, that have been sublimated, my drives that have been sublimated into my culture, and if they've not been sublimated properly, then screw it. It doesn't matter. Like I'm an absolute beast in reality, right? I'm just complete utter trash, right? I just want to murder and loot and pillage. I'm just a modern day Viking, right? Let's just say that. This person is a modern day Viking, and they're just horrible, right? Like now. The only reason that we would give for that person to, there's only two answers that we could say that this person was wrong. That they were wrong that they actually thought that's what they were. It's like, mate, you're not a modern day Viking. You'd be better suited to being like a gamer or something, and maybe just playing video games. And this is actually going to make you really sad. Or something like that. You're not actually a Sigma male. This actually doesn't make you harder. This is all just kind of cringe, and maybe we need to kind of take a step back from this scenario, right? Now that's one position where you just go, you are actually physically wrong about yourself, right? And that's like, that would be like you're ontologically incorrect about yourself. And then there is the next point, which would be that, where I think you want to kind of take it, that when you start talking about like the aggregation of reasons, and this is what kind of confuses us, because all of this is particularized to this given individual, right? So this given individual is this. Let's just assume that they are this modern day Viking. We actually agree, like, oh, you're a fucking brute. What the hell's wrong with you? We're going to lock you up, right? And let's say we're intent to imprison this person. We wouldn't be able to say they were a bad person, or that their actions were actually wrong, that they just contradict our desires in this framework. And this aggregation of desires is really just an alliance between similar desires. It's not actually that there is any truth towards our position being morally superior or not. And what we're talking about in terms of morality in this case is really just a power structure that we use to prevent, let's say, harm to ourselves. But if I was strong enough that I could overpower that entire structure, like let's say I've got access to nuclear codes or something, and I'm some sort of evil mastermind, then there's nothing obligating me to do it. Like there's nothing wrong with my position.
Right. So, I think I think you understand that I would reject the first one, not necessarily out of hand, but because I don't necessarily agree that he could actually be wrong about that being true of himself. Like he may just really want to be a Viking. In the second case, I would agree that in this particular case, the person is. See, the thing is, the way I frame morality is not going to be compatible with kind of the sentence structure you're using. So, what I mean is if it doesn't matter if 100 people in the population want him to act differently, ontologically, objectively, there's no intrinsic value in that, right? But it whether or not it's intrinsically or ontologically valuable, it is true about that group of people.
Yeah.
Right? Whether or not they have the power to change his mind, whether or not they force him to do something, is kind of irrelevant to this conceptualization of morality. It's, do they all have reasons? And if they do, we would say that those are moral reasons for that person not to behave like that. And the only distinction between like a reason that someone has versus all the reasons is the same distinction between the money I have in my pocket and all the money that exists, right? It's just a distinction in perspective, I guess is the way to say it. It's just, we can make a claim about the truth of attitudes within a population. And that claim is what I'm calling a moral claim. So whether or not that person is right or wrong about his own personal attitudes is kind of irrelevant. It's a matter of whether the population at large, whether or not they have the power to change his mind or actually can. They have reasons to at least to try to change his attitude.
Right. And those reasons are particularized. Like, so for example,
to each individual,
yeah. So if he was to convince the population through a propaganda campaign that...
Well, hold on. You mean convince or change their desires?
Like, change their desires. And let's say, like, he indoctrinates them. They're all fascists now. Like, let's say he's like, really great at propaganda. Like, Joseph Goebbels somehow turns the entire population into a bunch of mindless murderers. I mean, I guess that's kind of beyond even those most filthy propagandists, but whatever. Let's just assume that this man changes like the minds of 51% of the population. He has the majority. They're all like, yeah, like actually, yeah, we should. Like, have you seen the film Battle Royale?
No, but I'm okay with the scenario. Keep going.
Yeah. So Battle Royale is basically the Hunger Games where it come from, and it's really brutal, and it's actually a brilliant film. It's like Japanese, it's Japanese, Korean. I don't know. Anyway, it's a brilliant film. About basically how humans engage in, let's say, like survival like situations and stuff. Anyway, it's got loads of ethical stuff in it. But it's basically you're thrown into a jungle, you give them weapons, and you're told only one person gets off alive, or you're all gonna get killed. That's how it's going down. Like everyone dies. Like, you get basically, I think it's like a bomb around your neck or something, and you're basically told like if you don't, you die. It's something like that. Anyway, so it's a lovely film. I say heartwarming.
Okay.
Yeah, like this is the thing. Let's say he's like convinces the population that thank you for the phone, by the way. Let's say he convinces the population that actually we all want this brutal entertainment, like gladiatorial combat, children murdering each other. It's gonna be great, and everyone's like 51% of people like yeah, like wow, this is such a great idea. That's moral now, yeah?
Okay, so my response to that would be, so let's consider this population that now want to kill each other, right? Would you agree that
organized even so for example, it's only like the only people that we're gonna do it to are, let's say, I don't know, have no loved ones who care about them individually, or something like that, or orphans or something, I don't know.
Yeah, okay. But still, so the act of killing someone that doesn't want to die, would you say that people generally have reasons to condemn desires that cause others to want to kill?
I mean, I would say that, like, overall, that there is a rationality behind ethics which is objective. This is the thing. So I would make an argument that's metaphysically totally different to this. So I'm, like, in terms of, I'm trying to operate under your system right now.
Okay,
but if you're just asking us colloquially, Like, do I think that if we accept that humans act in the way that you're describing them to act, that they would have reasons, let's say, for self-protection to not allow this to exist? Yes, some may, but then that one, you could say that he convinces them out of these reasons, where they're like, actually, the value of my protection versus the entertainment value that I'll get is actually fair. I'd rather live in Rome than live in, let's say, like modern day society. I'd rather have that kind of relationship with my peers, where we all have a blast. I'm probably safe for the most part, and it's only those people who are undesirables or the minorities who get punished.
Well, I mean, those undesirables and minorities still exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they still have reasons to cause others to change their perspective.
Yeah, but they're minorities in the moral system. That's what I'm kind of pointing out. Like, it seems to me that the judgment, the aggregate of these reasons, if we even assume that they can be aggregated, which I kind of have a problem with as well. But then I think you're probably relating that to like maybe some sort of conceptualism. Like the concept itself is real, right? Like, and I think that's kind of what you're relating it to, like kind of like Abelard or something. So it's like kind of like a form of conceptualism, right? And then so you're saying is that like there is this universal principle, which is actually just the aggregate of all of these other like particular principles, and that exists as what morality is. It represents the will of the people, right? In a kind of democratic aggregation, and that's all morality is. And then, so what I'm presenting is that we've got 51% of the population who are legit on board, like they think this is going to be great. I just want to know if they think that if that's now moral.
Okay. Well, I guess I would ask. Well, I'm having a hard time with this hypothetical, but because I don't understand what you mean by they're on board with it. Do you mean they don't want to be killed themselves?
Oh, they're okay with the risk that, let's say, their children may be killed, or they don't want to be killed themselves. But none of these people are part of the group that is being selected. The group that's being selected that can only be sampled for this battle royale is a minority group that represents 10% of the population. Only X number of people. They only kill so much as the breed, so that they'll always contain a standard population size that can be exploited indefinitely.
Sure, but the general act type of killing someone in this manner wouldn't just apply to the minority, right?
Well, why not? So, like, we're talking about like a strict, like, for example, killing like outside of the Hunger Games, like battle royale scenario. That's wrong. We're not going to let that happen. Nobody wants that. We just want the battle royale murdering these people for our entertainment.
Right, but no one outside the game would want to be in it, right?
Yeah, but none of it will be. Right. Only 10%.
Right, well, okay, so everyone has a reason to not be part of that situation.
I agree.
Right?
Well, they have a reason not to be in the game.
Right. So even if they want to have the games exist, they have reason to not want to be in the game.
Yep.
Which means they really have reasons for the game not to exist, because in theory, the act type, maybe not in the particular, like maybe they're not actually in danger of it happening, but the distinction between them and somebody in the game is just arbitrary, which means in theory the power dynamic could change at some point, even in theory, not necessarily in practice. But the fact is they wouldn't want to be part of that, right? They wouldn't want to be somebody in the game, and therefore they have reason to cause others not to want to put them into the game.
But I could make an absolute opposite argument. I could say that, like, in trying to, let's say, create this social alliance with this group, in order so that this doesn't happen, so that they're removing the risk of this happening to them, they could by and large be increasing the risk that this happens to them, and they may fear that social alienation. They might want to be considered even as caring for this group, or they want to be considered like, a spoil sport. Shit, I mean, people hate vegans, right? And like, we're in a culture that's pretty reasonable. Like, I mean, we're talking about a culture of people who are like, not the best people, clearly. like, uh,
Yeah.
and they don't want to associate and alienate themselves in some sort of social hierarchy. Like they're like, okay, well, if I, you know, go with the group in this scenario, I'm safer than if I go against the group.
Yeah.
So there's that dynamic to consider. I mean, there's also the aspect of the fact that, well, actually they actually want to watch the game too. Um, so even if you were to say they have reasons for what not wanting the game to exist, those reasons have to supersede their reasons for wanting the game to exist in some sort of risk-reward ratio that you would deem to be irrational, right? So you'd have to go
No,
like,
not necessarily.
well, like they would have to go like for whatever reason that they desire, like because like, if we're saying that the desires are the action motivating process, which allows the individual to perform speech acts, and I'm assuming that you're coming from, let's say, a Humean point of motivation, in which it's kind of passion orientated, that these reasons would have to be influence the passions, so that the individual either feels more fear or compassion or whatever it is, which allows them to, engage in a speech act to stand up to prevent this occurring. So entering the moral sphere with their reasons to support the abolition of this game. Now,
Right, that would be the reason they do that, but that doesn't mean those are the only reasons that exist, right? So remember, this is an objective basis of the aggregate of all individuals, right? So you could say, well, this group has power, and they really want to see these games happen, and even they could even be caring for the people who are being subjugated to it,
So you would say that, like, you could, for example, have something that's moral that could be impossible even. So like you could have the aggregate of all of these reasons, but then them not have the motivational force to actually change people's behavior.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Of course, I mean, what the fuck's the point?
because like for instance, animals, they have reasons for us not to try to eat them, but they don't have the ability to convince us not to.
I agree. No, I agree, and I hope I'm not coming across as like I'm not laughing at your position, because I think it's actually I think it's quite interesting. Like, I actually really like engaging. I just think that this, like, I love engaging in this sort of thought experiment sort of thing. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I do disagree with your entire metaphysical position, but I disagree with everyone's entire metaphysical position. So this isn't something new to me. I think you actually represent closer to the norm than I do, in terms of, like, even in philosophers. I'm an idealist, and the majority of philosophers, I'm pretty sure, are actually. I know that there's a lot of science, like most are scientific realists, and I think in that most are physicalists, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I'm an idealist.
You're an idealist, okay.
Yeah, but probably not. I'm probably not the same kind of idealist as you are.
Yeah, probably like a subjective idealist. That's why I thought, like, at the start, like, but then you started talking about, like, brain states causally kind of producing behavior.
Yeah, that's more like colloquially speaking. Yeah, I guess I could probably talk about this for hours, but the actual topic of this conversation, which we haven't really touched on.
Oh yeah, I guess the reason I'm asking is because it's like, just to kind of bring it back, is because we're talking about the application of these universal principles, right? Whether, like, there is a universal principle, which, if it existed in relation to the creation of, a new generation of individuals, like, the creation of new humans being born, whether it would be right or wrong, and whether an individual should look at it as right or wrong, and alter their and I would assume that you're also talking about altering their behavior to reflect that right and wrong. But what kind of I'm kind of getting mixed up here is, it seems that even if it was right and wrong, that it's the right and wrong of it is really just it's kind of like it doesn't actually have more truth, in that it's actually better or worse. Like, it's not actually like, it doesn't necessarily express our desires and drive to a greater degree. It's just the truth that there are reasons that exist. Not necessarily that those reasons would allow for the greater expression of subjectivity or some sort of better outcome. It's just that the better outcome is the reasons. You're saying that like we would all have a kind of inclination that this is reasonable.
So let's put it in ways that I would describe my anti-natalist philosophy.
Yes,
right?
that's probably the best thing to do.
Yeah, for example, I think we would agree that causing unnecessary and let's leave it at that. Causing unnecessary suffering is problematic at best and morally wrong generally.
Okay, so causing unnecessary suffering is wrong.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you agree with that? So the way I would say is we have a prohibition from causing unnecessary suffering.
So you think that's a prohibition? Or do you think that it's so like? Okay, right. So wrong. You mean we have reasons to inhibit suffering?
Let's just. I know you're not going to agree with the ontology of my morality. What I would like to focus on is what we would agree with.
Yeah.
And the conclusions we would come to based on our own moral ideas. So
yeah, that's fine.
If we can agree that causing unnecessary and I would say unjustified suffering, but I know a lot of people have questioned what does justified mean, right? And to what extent. But at the very least, we don't have to cause a new person to exist in order to solve some problem with, something that they would benefit from. In other words, we're not fixing a toothache that they have, right? We don't have to cause them to exist to fix a problem they have. In other words.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Okay. Because when we talk about justified, causing justified suffering, it might be something like, taking someone to the dentist and, they're going to drill in their teeth and it's really painful. But we know that there's a good reason to do that because they're going to have long-term dental health issues if they don't, right? So there's a justification.
Right, yeah. So, like, because you believe in the coherence theory of truth, and from what I remember, the coherence theory of truth, it's sort of, you would say that there were essentially related belief states, and that they are supporting belief states. From what I'm aware, so it'd be like, if there was like a kind of like a normative hiccup that I had a belief that didn't merge into the system of let's say like I believe that I believe that unnecessary suffering is wrong. I also believe that causing suffering is good, and I also believe that actually it would be like, because I think that would be like a direct contradiction, which I think would be any system.
Right.
Let's say like it's something a little bit more subtle. So let's say I believe that unnecessary suffering is wrong. I believe that like stabbing people causes them to suffer. And then I say I believe that stabbing people is not wrong. The argument would be, well, no, that doesn't cohere with the system of beliefs. You have two coherent beliefs, but you have one incoherency within that system which you need to reevaluate.
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of where you're at with justification.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So
just
all right. Yeah. So that's one part of it, right? So we have I think we're on the same page as far as prohibition from causing unnecessary and unjustified suffering.
I would agree that we shouldn't cause unnecessary. I mean, if you're asking for my personal positions here, then I would say that we shouldn't cause unnecessary suffering, and that we should prohibit it.
Okay. Yeah. So that's one step. Okay. So then, well, you could also agree then that
I would probably, if I may, say unjustifiable rather than unnecessary, because I think you can have unnecessary suffering which is justifiable.
Okay. Sure. But what I mean necessary, I mean there's nothing about the universe that requires that suffering.
No,
Right?
I mean, there's nothing about. I mean, like, other than the fact that, like, you know, if causal materialism is true, then everything's necessarily like determined. So, like, any suffering that happened was necessary in material terms, because you couldn't have acted otherwise.
Well, it'll be contingent, right?
But I mean, yeah, it would be contingent about things that you couldn't control.
Right. Okay. But as far as it's in your control, you shouldn't do it, right? Yeah. So the next part would be, well, we know that causing joy or bliss or happiness is good, but it's not obligatory. If the person that would experience that joy is not being deprived by its absence. Would you agree with that?
I think we're obliged to express subjectivity to the greatest degree. So I think that there is positive duties.
Okay, I agree with there being positive duties, but I'm saying if no one is going to be deprived by the failure to attain that duty, would you still
loss
say
of opportunity?
duty?
I mean, it depends, like, in how we define it, right? Because they're kind of like opportunity loss, isn't it? Like, there is a loss, the joy that would have potentially happened.
So is that joy that would potentially happen if no one's being deprived of that joy be a duty?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to look. I wouldn't put this in terms of joy. So I think it's expression of subjectivity, right? I would link this straight to the subjective, to the individual themselves. So I'd say, like,
I guess let me frame it like this. Do you have, what's the word I'm looking for? Do you regret not causing people to exist to experience subjectivity?
No.
Do I regret not causing people to exist to experience subjectivity? Probably not, because I think they would have experienced, positive well-being. I don't think there'd be any sort of good subjectivity expression. You know, there wouldn't be. We wouldn't have any freedom in that respect. So I think that they would have probably just been pretty miserable, and so no, I don't really regret it.
Okay, but if we could say that they would have a good experience, that they have a good life, would you feel a duty to create that life? My opinion is no. We don't have a duty to do it. We consider it. We can say it's like a good thing, maybe even supererogatory.
And I think this is kind of the thing. I would say the duties actually lie in the institutions, right? And I'm not avoiding to think, because I'd say they're going to fight it. But if you say, let's say there's a duty in the institution to have children, in having the children, the expression of that duty would actually lead to a rational conclusion, in the sense that I would say that it was increasing the expression of subjectivity. Then yes, I would regret not doing my duty.
So you think the expression of subjectivity is intrinsically valuable?
Yes.
So you lament the fact that there's not more people to express their subjectivity?
Only if it would express, because I would say because I'm an indifferentist, when we talk about subjectivity, you can increase the number of subjects to infinite, and it would only be one. Like there's only one concept being expressed. So if it wouldn't actually increase the expression of subjectivity, as in like the one concept, then and would actually decrease it, then it would not actually be a good thing. Like, having more people is not necessarily a good thing.
Okay.
It's only.
So let's say we have a experience machine that we're able to plug nearly infinite number of people into, and they're going to have good experiences their entire life. Would we have an obligation to create people to plug into that machine?
No.
This is
an obligation. I mean, is it a duty? I don't mean, would it be a good thing for those people? I mean, do you actually have a duty to go out and...
I don't think there is a difference between a good thing for those people and what is actually good. I mean, that's why I was saying, so, like, just to give you a brief understanding of indifferentism, like, I think the notion of right and wrong or like the notions of right and wrong, universally contains all subjectivity. So when I'm talking about the expression of subjectivity, I'm talking about freedom. I think that the freedom of the whole is one and the same as the freedom of each and every individual person. Like that universal freedom.
Right, so as long as there's like two people that are infinitely able to express their subjectivity, that's as good as a trillion people who can do the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. All right, so with that, I would say I don't think you would have a duty to create those people just in order to have more people that can create.
Yeah, I mean, it would be more like if it was, let's say, like expression of subjectivity was nothing, let's say birth and death rates, the death rate was preventing, let's say, society functioning, so subjectivity was falling, and if we had children, then we could prevent, more people would, like having more people would actually allow for the greater expression of subjectivity. Then you could say, like, actually having children is an obligation.
Okay.
But
all right.
I think,
that to me, that's more of a secondary thing. But going back to
I will say, can I just pause this, just so the anti-net listen chat know? I think our society's broken as fuck. I think this probably need to really consider whether you are going to have children, the state that you actually exist in, whether you would be making things better or worse. There's so many things to consider. And obviously we should look to our institutions and the reasons that those contain. I'm just providing a hypothetical, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, this is a sidebar. At the very least, any vegan who's vegan for ethical reasons shouldn't have kids just on the basis that their kids are very likely, based on population demographics, to be carnist or non-vegan.
I don't think we've got any evidence to say that, to be entirely honest with you, because we don't...
My kids aren't vegan.
Well, look,
I know it's anecdotal evidence, but...
I'm just going to say, like, well, I think it's kind of anecdotal in the sense that, like, look, there's no reason for us to necessarily believe that what kids would reject veganism if we're engaged in, like, vegan community, and all those sorts of things, but also whether or not we would also have a positive impact upon the normativity of society, like raising children vegan, and things like that. So there's a whole ballpark of things to consider when it's like being a vegan, being a vegan parent. I don't think it boils down to...
Yeah. This reminds me a lot of the Christian, and I don't mean to say this is what your reasoning is, but it reminds me of the Christian idea that we should have kids because my kids, the ones that I raised, will be Christian and therefore go to heaven, and they won't have any risk of going to hell because I'm a good parent, right? I know how to teach my kids how to be.
No, I mean, like, I think it's just a modulated. I think the risk is modulated, but I think that is in a way that can't be expressed. Though. Like, I don't think we have reasons to believe that, like, a vegan person raising a child vegan would have the same likelihood of becoming non-vegan as obviously someone who's raised in, let's say, a kind of carnist, dogmatic environment. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I'd say the risk is definitely less, but there's still a significant risk, I would say.
It's just hard to kind of quantify. That's, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. I'd say I agree with it. It's hard to quantify. So anyway, to circle back, based on our agreement that we have a prohibition from creating unjustified or unjustifiable suffering, and my claim would be that procreation causes unjustified suffering, and no obligation to create those people to experience joy because they're not going to be deprived if they never come to existence. Then weighing those two sides would lead me to conclude that it's prohibited from we are prohibited from creating new people.
Okay, but I don't understand. So, one, I don't understand why you necessarily say that we are
prohibited.
So, like, here's the thing. So we are producing subjects who may or may not feel, like, they will feel some negativity and some positivity. They will suffer and they'll feel well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't we... We are responsible for that well-being. You would say that we are as responsible for the well-being as the suffering.
Once they exist, yes.
Yes, and inasmuch we are then culpable, you would say, for only the suffering, or we are, or rather that we are culpable for both, but the only thing we are obligated to avoid
Suffering.
is suffering and not bring around well-being.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But I don't
We are
understand
obligated.
why are we not obligated to bring around well-being?
Because we don't, there's not going to be anybody that's deprived. Like the person that would
But it's not
experience
about-
that
it's not
well-being
being
isn't
about-
being deprived.
Yeah, but it's not
Of
about
it.
being, like, so for example, it's not about being deprived. It's just in and of itself, like, are we assuming, like, would you say well-being is good?
Not in and of itself. No, I don't agree with that.
So, but is suffering bad?
Yes.
Not in and of itself.
So it's about the individual themselves experiencing it.
Yes.
Correct.
Right, great, I agree with you there, thank God. Okay,
Mhm.
but in like, the individual experiencing suffering, the experience of suffering would be bad. Yeah?
Okay, so you're focusing on the subject that will experience these things, and I'm focusing on our prohibitions and duties
Okay,
on what acts we should take.
Okay, I'm just wondering, like, so, like, even if we, like, because, like, I would obviously say, like, moreover than this, that I think that it's all about the expression of subjectivity, and our duties are actually embedded in our ethical institutions. And we're actually conceptually working through things which are not individualistic anyway, and I would reject this entire sort of individualistic kind of notion towards ethics. But if I assume your position, I'm assuming that when we are engaging in morality, it's in this aggregate of reasons, that these reasons are grounded in individual evaluations. From your, this is what I'm understanding, that these are individual evaluations of pain and pleasure, basically, or like suffering and well-being. Or like so it's that you don't want to suffer and you do want well-being. So if everyone wants well-being and we aggregate that, why would that not be a duty? Is what I'm asking.
Right, because there is a difference between causing our duty to cause well-being to exist when it's not necessary for the being, versus our prohibition from causing them to suffer. If we take the counterexample of we don't cause them to exist, they won't suffer and they won't have well-being, right?
Yes, I agree.
We have not done anything wrong, but we also have not done anything good.
Right.
Okay, but if we cause somebody to experience suffering, we have a prohibition against that, but we don't have a duty to cause the well-being if they wouldn't have experienced it otherwise.
Okay, so I've got two things to say. So one, if like this only comes to point at the point of existence anyway, right? And so I still can't understand why we would have a negative obligation but not a positive obligation, because it seems that everyone wants well-being and wants to avoid suffering, and at the point of not creating the being, we've not done anything wrong, but we've not done anything right, as you've said. But if at the point of creating a being, you could say that if we were to create a being that had more pleasure than it did suffering in a ratio that was by and large like felt nice for that individual, that it was an experience of positivity for that individual, that would be the right thing to do.
Well, hold on. We already agreed that we don't have an obligation to cause that, though.
Well, no, like this is the thing. I'm asking you why you think this obligation doesn't exist. Like, so I think that I said that I think positive obligations do exist before.
Yeah, and I didn't disagree. I just don't think this is one of them.
But I just don't understand why you wouldn't. And then the second point is, what if everyone in society thinks this is the right thing to do anyway? So let's say you individually think that it's like, because let's be honest, antinatalists are the minority, right? Same as vegans as well, right? You know, why would your moral reasoning like circumvent moral reasoning which stands up and above your judgment? Like you'd be like, right, well, this like objectively moral reasoning tells me I should have children.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're asking.
Because you're saying that like all these reasons are like what moral reasoning isn't subject to the particular individual, but at the same time is aggregated of particular judgments or particular reasons that individuals make towards the expression of their
I'd be
desire.
careful not to say judgments because that's based on the beliefs, and the reasons are not necessarily based on beliefs. But go ahead.
Okay. So let's say you said that it's just purely it's these reasons. Everyone has these reasons, right? And that's these like, and these reasons are. Wait, what do you want to define reasons as? By the way, let's just.
Yeah. So there are the not define reasons. They're desire or prohibition-based motivations to cause another to act in some way or have different desires. So,
wait, sorry. So
you can have
like also the reasons would so again reasons are motivations to have someone acting differently.
Yeah, if I have for example, if I have
so the majority of the population have the motivation to destroy antinatalism as a notion and to produce more children. They want more children. Let's just assume, I don't think they do, but let's just assume they did. It would be immoral to be an antinatalist then.
No.
I don't understand. I'm totally lost.
Because the reason not to be an antinatalist is not due to the reason people have to have kids. It is due to the prohibition against causing unnecessary and unjustified suffering.
Right. So you're saying we already have, right? So this is the claim you made. One, we already have these moral reasons. They don't cohere with our actions.
Correct.
Right. Okay. That makes things a little bit easier. And you're saying that the moral reasoning comes from our desire to not cause unnecessary suffering, and but we also don't desire then to cause well-being.
We desire to cause well-being in people that exist, but we don't have a reason to cause new people to exist in order to experience well-being, because if we didn't, they wouldn't be deprived. And this is evidenced by the fact that
that's exactly the same position. Like, look, this is kind of why asymmetry has to happen, right, at this point, because you could say the exact same thing about the suffering. The individual isn't going to be deprived of well-being or experience negativity unless they exist. So
right, but when we talk about humans, we're not talking about some just conceptual visualization. We're talking about beings that exist, right? We don't lament the fact that there's not an infinite amount of AIs being currently created in order to experience.
But just because we don't lament it doesn't mean that we shouldn't. Like that's kind of what the point you're making. Like just because we act as if we should have children doesn't mean we or we act as, and we do have children doesn't mean we should have children, right? Based off these like sort of underlying motives for engaging in moral discourse.
Yeah, I'm making a claim about the way things are.
You kind of like, it's kind of like a meta-ethical claim you're making, really. That's kind of like, look, these are the principles that are kind of guiding morality as a whole, and one is about like the avoiding unnecessary suffering, and the other is about, let's say, producing well-being. Now, what you want to say is that in not having children, we avoid unnecessary suffering, so not having children is good. But you don't want to say that having children which experience greater well-being than suffering is also good, based on the same principles. And that's what's confusing us, because it's an asymmetry argument.
Yeah, it is a type of asymmetry. I wouldn't agree with that. I wouldn't disagree with that.
Okay, and I'm just kind of confused as to
Okay.
what's the justification for that asymmetry.
I'm not saying, well, the justification is that this is how people are. We don't have people who lament the fact that there's not people on Mars have experiencing well-being.
I don't know, people
Right.
kind of do though, because people do want to like create settlers and expand the human population. Like people do want to do that stuff. But even if they didn't lament it, right? Let's say they didn't lament it, but they don't necessarily lament the idea of it actually happening either. So let's say they're indifferent to it.
Right. So
if
we're
they're-
indifferent towards the creation of this well-being, but we're not indifferent to the creation of the suffering that will ensue.
But we're
Right?
also
we
not
have a
indifferent.
prohibition.
Yes, I agree.
Not
with
that we
that.
feel. Yeah. Right. So.
But then that's the thing. We're also not indifferent to the well-being it will create.
But only for the people that exist.
Well, yes, but this is all coming into exist at the point of existence, right? We've agreed that we don't necessarily lament the non-existence of negative or positive, because it doesn't exist. There's nothing to lament, right? Right. So I think we both agree with that.
But let me ask you this: is it good? So this will kind of answer the question. Is it a good thing that there's no one, let's say, suffering in the ovens of Auschwitz right now?
Well,
Yes.
absolutely, that it is a good thing. Yes.
It is a good thing, yes.
Yes.
So you agree that you can have a good thing without anyone experiencing the opposite?
As in, like, it would, yeah, well, yeah, I would talk about the concept of subjectivity, as we've said, and I would say that would overall reduce the freedom and the expression of subjectivity as a whole. Like, the existence of those people suffering would be worse. However, the existence of people living incredible lives would also increase it, and it's also sad that they don't live their lives as well.
So you're saying the corollary, which would be, you think it would be bad if there was no one to experience an expression of subjectivity.
Yeah, I mean, if subjectivity,
that would be a bad
I don't think it would be
situation?
bad if there was no expression of subjectivity. I think that there would be no such thing as good or bad, because subjectivity is
Right.
is the measure is what is the measure of good and bad. It's like the
Exactly.
subjective expression, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and so
Yeah.
so like
So you agree there is an asymmetry, because you just stated
No, I don't.
you would think, well, you did. Hold on a second.
Sorry,
Let me
explain.
show you.
yeah. Go on.
You said you would agree that it's good that no one suffers in the ovens of Auschwitz. So there's no one to experience that, but it's still a good situation.
Yeah.
And that it's not bad that it wouldn't be bad if no one were around to experience subjectivity.
But no. So this is the thing. Like, if there was no one at all, there would be no concept of subjectivity as the yardstick of good and bad. So there
Right.
would be no such thing as right and wrong. Like, ethics happens at the point of existence.
That's
Now-
what I said. It's not bad. It would not be bad. I didn't say it would be good. I said it would be not bad.
But it would also be bad for people to not be around living happy lives. So, like, in the sense that, like, if
I
they're
don't agree with that.
well, this is the
I
thing.
think that's our basis
But that's
of
the
disagreeing here. I don't
asymmetry.
think
That's the asymmetry. Now, I'm wondering where the asymmetry. So I think that we are obligated to the expression of subjectivity, primarily, first and foremost, to the removal of negative, like, for the removal of, like, negativity, of negative expression, where it's like the trespassing upon the subjectivity of others, you know, in relation to our own personal actions, and then the greater expression of those individuals, freedom, like their desires, like giving them the greatest content of their desires, so that they can go and live
Nice.
rationally free lives that produce as much positive experience for subjects as possible, and that would be the expression of their freedom. That would be the expression of everyone's freedom, and that is what we are talking about when something is right or wrong. And this is
Right.
all of this as a yardstick is subjectivity itself. And so at
Right,
the point
and
of having a child, what we are considering is, like, before we have a child, what we are considering is subjectivity itself. And if there was, and when we're considering those people in Auschwitz, we're considering subjectivity itself, which exists. But if there was, it's the same thing as if we are considering, let's say, producing a society. Let's say like loads of us are going to get together. We're going to go and produce a society on Mars. It's going to be the bomb. Everyone's going to love it there. Everyone's going to have a great time. We're going to increase the expression of subjectivity. We might even be able to help others reduce their suffering. We're going to live moral, ethical lives, and we're going to, it's going to be the best society ever. Yeah, that we are 100% obligated to produce a better society. That's exactly what, in that respect.
Okay.
So, and if that meant having children, I don't see the issue.
Okay, so my issue is this: you agreed previously that two people with the ability to fully express their subjectivity would be just as good as a million.
Yeah.
Right? So let's just say we have only an obligation to create people insofar as there will be some expression of subjectivity, even if it's only one person. Can you agree with that much? So there's no reason to add to the pool, is what I'm saying. There's no reason
to just get obsessed with. It's not about quantity; it's about quality. Yeah. So qualifier. Right. Yeah.
And if it would increase the quality of existing people to have less people, then you would agree that that would be a duty.
Oh, 100%. Overpopulation. Okay. Stop having kids, you selfish bastards.
Right. Well, if I could convince you that any amount of kids, in addition to what we already have, would decrease the overall expression of subjectivity, then you would agree that we should stop as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I'm running out of time, so I don't have. But this is another argument I could use. I don't have time to do it right now, but maybe.
Yeah, that's entirely my fault. I will apologize for that. You had 5 hours free, and then I've just squandered that entire time. I'm sorry. I'm the least organized person ever. And you could make that argument. I'll say, and I would accept that argument, and I would say that is contextual. That is the universal principle being invoked here has nothing to do with whether we should or should not have children in general. But so for example, universally, having children would not necessarily be wrong. They're given the context. So an antinatalism would be rejected then. It would be contextually wrong. You'd be saying it would be wrong to have children in X, Y, and Z, but it also could be right to have children in A, B, and C. And that would be, I don't think that would be compatible, at least to my understanding, with an antinatalist position.
All right. Well, from what I understand of your position, it would never be obligatory to cause someone to come into existence, unless and only unless that would somehow increase the ability to express subjectivity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that our duties are non-individuated. I don't pick them anyway. I'm not the one that's I get to choose. I think it's rationally determined through imminent institutional development.
But I think you would also agree. I think we've already set this flag that you agree that it's wrong to create unnecessary and unjustified suffering. And your contention is that it is justified.
I think that this is what I think that to give you more clarity, this is what underpins what duties and what laws in society. We don't cause people to we don't trespass on other individuals' freedoms, on the rights and liberties of other individuals, and we try to express the rights and liberties of individuals to the greatest degree.
Yeah, and I think so. One of the principles that and I don't want to get too deep into this because like I said, I do have to go. But one of the principles, and I don't mean the particular, but the principle of consent is violated every time you cause someone to come into existence. Because you're putting that person into a situation that they did not choose to be in.
Right.
Well, I would say that the judgment that you are talking about in terms of consent could not have been made concrete until the individual could actually judge it, which is post their existence.
Which is why.
So which I would say that they could not have consented. It's even if it's not a violation of their will because their will did not exist. You haven't violated.
I didn't say that.
No, but that's the thing.
I said it's a violation of the principle of consent.
Well, no, because I think that, like, so for example, I think that an individual, so you could even be wrong about a judgment, right? So you could be like, take for example, like children who believe they've consented to like sex acts with adults. We'd be like, no, you haven't. You're incapable of consent.
Right.
And what we're talking about is then we're saying that there are underlying preconditions for what consent actually is, which is the expression of that subjectivity. You can't consent to something which is actually harmful and irrational. So, like, an individual can't consent to being murdered, which is why I would say, like, an individual actually can't, like, you know, go and sell themselves to a cannibal, which is what, like, or not sell themselves, but, like, give themselves to a cannibal, which is what, like, tried to happen in Germany one time, right? And say that, no, you can't consent to that, you're insane. That would be, that's where I would say, like, if we look at what the conditions of what consent means, it's already post-existence.
No, I don't agree with that.
See,
Because
how would you express like what consent? Consent, like how would you define consent?
So, I define the principle of consent is you should refrain from putting someone into a situation without their agreement, unless you have prior knowledge of their assent to that type of situation. And obviously, those kinds of things are violated whenever you create somebody because you can't get their consent ahead of time, and you can't know what their interests are ahead of time.
Well, wait a minute. I'd say that you can't. I would say you can know their interests ahead of time, at least for the most part. It hasn't been made concrete, but like abstractly, you could have knowledge of what, like, so you know they're going to be human. You know, like the possibilities of their existence. If you didn't know all of the possibilities, then you would know all of the possible interests that they could have. If you know the majority of them, then you could probably have a good understanding of what their interests are going to be. Like that's one of the reasons why I can make judgments about their suffering and well-being in the first place. Like I know that they're going to have an interest in not being like burnt alive and stuff, right? You know, which is why like I would say like yeah, I can make reasonable like ethical claims about like the individual's ontology.
Okay.
And then,
yeah, I mean, obviously, there's going to be points that we're just not going to come to an agreement.
that's fair enough.
That's
but
fair.
here's what I'll say. I say when we look at consent and we look at, let's say, like I would say that consent is consent would, I would say, would be is an act of permission or a permissible action to perform against an individual or to perform to an individual. So to bring someone into existence, there's a question of whether that would be an act to them. I'm willing to say that it is. In which case, like bringing them into existence, was this act of their creation permissible? And that's what would underlie consent. Because if like consent would imply that you are breaching the freedom of an individual. Like if someone does not consent to you stopping them from killing themselves, you wouldn't say you've breached their consent. You actually you would say that they were trying to breach their own consent and I stopped them. You know, depending on, like I would anyway. So this is where I would say that when we talk about consent, it has to be post-existence. And whether it's permissible, I think if you brought someone into life to use as a means to an end, you are breaching their consent in the violation of their rights. But and that's where and it's at the point of rights that we talk about consent. Everyone has a right to expect certain behavior, and if you are breaching those rights, then you are wrong. If you are not breaching, and you are breaching their consent, would you agree with that?
Well, that's you kind of touched on another one of my arguments, which is that all reasons to have somebody, to create somebody, are only means to an end. They're never for the end itself. I know you have this idea of expressing their subjectivity, so I don't want to get too bogged down, like I said, but
because I mean I can say that because I think the individual is indifferent to the substance of like what we are talking about as the individual in society. I don't think that I wouldn't argue for the existence of, let's say, particulars that are separate from the universal that exists as individuality. So like if you can bring them into being for themselves, which is part and parcel of the universal principles of like of the universality of subjectivity, if you're trying to express subjectivity itself, so yeah, like that's like, but I do think. Look, I will say, like, I will say.
I do think you're kind of unique in that, though. I mean, if you ask, you know, 999 out of 1,000 parents or people who are going to be parents why they're doing it, this is not going to be the reason.
Oh yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think people do it on selfish reasons. I think people do it for the wrong reason. I think people exploit the shit out of their kids. I think most parents are bad. I think that a lot of people shouldn't have had kids, and I think that and that's why I'm sympathetic to antinatalists. I think that like the way our society actually engages with reproduction is terrible. Like, that's undeniable.
The problem is, so I would agree with you as a practical antinatalist. I would say you're probably that, but then the issue is you're going to have biases that lead you to believe that you're better than the rest of the population. In a way that would justify you having kids.
Yeah, I mean the idols of the cave in terms of like Francis Bacon, and he talks about that, like, you know, we all have our individuated like psychological biases that makes us think that, like, for whatever reason, you know, like like something that isn't the case. And like, you know, and I think there is a good idiom that he says, hold with the greatest scrutiny that which brings you the most pleasure. And I think that is probably right. Like, if you like the idea a lot, you're probably biased, and you haven't thought it through. And I think that, like, he's probably right in that. But I wouldn't say that necessarily means that, like, for example, individual contexts don't genuinely modify whether it, you know. So for example, if I was in an economically better situation, if I was in an economically worse situation, if I would, like, you know, like, for example, let's say the world economy collapses or something, and, you know, food is scarce, and I'm talking about bringing kids in when we can't feed, you know, who will have, like, I'll be a dick. Like, I think that's where we need to really have these conversations, where we start talking about what we are trying to do.
But that's just, like, your opinion, man. Because, like, think about this. Here's something to consider. I don't mean to keep bringing this up, but it is instructive. There were Jews in Auschwitz that were having kids.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, this is a thing that happened because they were optimistic about the world after them.
I think, like, I'm not gonna lie, I'm impressed at that level. You've got to be like one hell of an optimist. I get sad sometimes just in general. I don't know how you could be like that much of an optimist in Auschwitz.
Well,
that's
that's how the way you feel about that is how I feel about all of our evolved biases. You know, whether it's optimism bias, silver lining bias,
whatever,
Pollyanna bias, right? Like, I try to take as objective view as I can, and
well, that's the thing. But I'm
all the reasons that people give to have kids, almost all of them are due to one or more of these biases.
Well, I think, like, obviously, I think that we can't have reasons which are institutionally embedded and imbued and that are rational outside of, like, the judgment of one individual or their, like, reasoning. I think our society is quite unique in the sense that it is very individualistic in history. Like, most societies never used to be, like, when people were having kids in the past, it wasn't like, oh, I want to have kids. It was like, it is your duty to have children for the state. You know, you will birth us sons anyway.
Well, how are we gonna you know, work the farm if we don't have enough hands? Right?
Exactly right. So, like, our society is quite different in the sense, like, we're not. Like, we'll have the opportunity to have a decline in population and not necessarily lead to economic ruin, although there are still maybe some issues. We've also questioned where institutions, like, we've hit a point of individualism where our institutions seem to be almost separate from reasons. Like, reasons have been made in our society to appear to be individuated to the individual, when I would say that reasons are collective and exist in our institutions. And that's like one of the big, and I do think I differ from a lot of people on that, which is why, like, most people I talk to are probably are mostly like social contract theorists, right? They're all like, oh yeah, we're all selfish, self-orientated and we only work together for mutual advantage, and this is all individually reasoned from my kind of egotistical individual worldview, right? That's kind of like the majority of what people think here, and that's just because of like liberalism and shit was really successful.
Yeah, and if you couldn't tell, I'm definitely not a social contractor.
Well, that's the thing. I don't think you are. But I think that. I think that that's the majority of our population, and unfortunately,
yeah, I would agree.
And I think that the only thing that is probably more ubiquitous is a consequentialist view. What is good and bad, even for the individual, is judged by like the experiences and the satisfaction, which is almost Hobbesian in itself. It's like, did I actually achieve what I wanted? Am I currently eating the cake? Right. If I am not, then this is bad. and so there's that as well. But I think that this is, I don't know, I think that we're in a state now where, most of our institutions are in crisis. There's just as many people who pretty much disagree with our institutional format as agree with it, in a reactionary way, not necessarily in a substantial way, most of the time. Do you know what I mean? It's not like they're reasoning out that it's wrong, they're just rejecting it for the sake of rejecting it. It's like, no, I disagree, I think that most people are now being produced by a market environment in which they consume themselves, and all of their sort of they sublimate their desires into what, rather than, let's say, a society which puts them into an institutional environment where they have these social roles which is meant to express their subjectivity in that way. They're instead sublimated into an environment which seeks to put them on a path of perpetual self-satisfaction, right? And that now has moved from a notion of having, the process of having something is now actually appearing to be something, and we're all trying to appear to each other as if we are this thing that we all want to be in the eyes of each other, and so we're all actually desiring some sort of social recognition as a form of currency, and that's like social media.
Yeah.
And that's where we kind of sit. And
it's just an illusion.
Yeah, and
it's just bullshit.
It is. Unfortunately, it is actually kind of bullshit, and that's where we're at. So, I can understand you just not wanting to have children into that. You're like, well, fuck. That's really shit. And I wouldn't even disagree necessarily.
You know what's funny? You mentioned this. So I haven't been antinatalist for very long. It's been about a little over 4 years, and you'll think this is funny, but what actually caused me to start thinking this way was when Trump got elected.
I can understand. I
don't want to raise or bring in anybody into a world that would think Trump is a good candidate for presidency.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think that's exactly. I think I say this to my girlfriend all the time. Sometimes I never thought Trump was going to get elected. I totally. I think there was one point when I said I was like, it's a joke. There's no way. And then it kind of just dawned on us. I was like, wait a minute, wasn't this guy like a reality TV star? I was like, oh shit. I was like, of course he's going to get elected in the United States. That's exactly who the president should be.
It fit up well, I think.